In the crushing silence of the abyss, a single red line on a monitor of steady blues spiked into an impossible rhythmic pattern. For Kaelen, sole caretaker of Ventus-IX, this was not geology. It was a heartbeat where none should exist. He moved to the main observatory, the hum of life support the only sound in halls built for 50. Outside the thick viewport, the station's lights barely pushed back a blackness so absolute it felt solid. Kaelen performed his daily system checks, the familiar sequence a small ritual against the profound weight of his solitude. For 734 days he had been the ghost in this machine, a lone consciousness suspended between a frozen ocean above and a world of geothermal fire below. The silence didn't just surround him, it was a presence, amplifying the sheer inhuman scale of his environment. Back in his Spartan quarters, the comms unit chimed, signaling a message had pierced the leagues of water. A holographic interface flickered to life, displaying the stern, corporate portrait of Director Thorne. The voice that followed was laced with static and devoid of warmth. Kaelen, quarterly projections are below target. We need a 12% increase in power output from the Ventus conduit. Your reports on system instability are noted, but considered within acceptable operational risk. The message was not a request. It was a command from another world, one that saw only numbers, not the groaning of a station pushed to its limits. Returning to the control room, Kaelen's meticulous nature took over. The rhythmic spike was a sensor ghost, a phantom born of pressure and heat. He told himself this as he initiated a deep diagnostic of the entire geothermal monitoring array. He would find the error, recalibrate, and file a report. But as cascading lines of code resolved into a final, stark notification, systems nominal. No errors detected. The mystery only deepened, shifting from an annoyance to a chilling impossibility. Logic had failed. Direct observation was the only path left. Kaelen strode to the drone deployment bay, the air thick with the smell of ozone and recycled coolant. He needed eyes in the fire. With practiced efficiency, he prepped the Manta, a sleek submersible hardened against the hellish conditions of the vent. Securing its final latches, he initiated the launch sequence. The powerful drone detached from its mooring, its lights cutting a brilliant swath as it descended toward the glowing, cavernous maw in the seabed, an unblinking eye into the planet's core. The feed from the Manta drone painted Kaelen's control room in alien light. What his powerful lamps revealed was not the jagged basalt he expected, but a vast, cathedral-like cavern of iridescent crystalline structures. They were not rock. They were something else, a semi-organic lattice that seemed to hum with captured energy. As he watched, a faint, internal luminescence pulsed through the walls, a slow, rhythmic beat of soft blue light. Kaelen's breath hitched. He pulled up the anomalous energy signature from earlier, laying it over the visual feed. The spike, the rhythmic pulse he had dismissed as a ghost, synced perfectly with the light. It was a heartbeat. Awe and a profound sense of impossibility washed over him. He was looking at something that defied geology, defied biology, defied everything he knew. Pushing the drone deeper, Kaelen followed a channel of intense thermal energy, a shimmering river of superheated fluid. But the further he went, the more the structure defied nature. This was no simple fissure. The crystalline walls were too smooth, the flow too directional. It was less a geological channel and more a colossal artery. The fluid wasn't just venting from the planet's core, it was being pumped, moved with a clear, systolic rhythm that resonated through the drone's chassis. The awe curdled into a mounting tension, a dawning, intellectual horror. This wasn't a place, it was a system. Shaken, Kaelen slammed his hand on the console, cutting the drone's forward thrust. He backed away from the screen, his mind racing. He remembered fragments of conversations from the original crew, hushed rumors of a classified xenobiology folder locked in the station's deep archive, a ghost file for a ghost crew. Driven by a desperate need for answers, he spun his chair to the master terminal. Security protocols flashed across the screen warning him away, but he bypassed them with frantic, precise commands. He was breaking a dozen corporate regulations, but the rules no longer mattered. After breaching the final firewall, he found it. A single, heavily redacted file titled Progenitor Class Biospheric Lifeform. Kaelen's blood ran cold as he read. It was a theoretical paper, an extrapolation of xenobiological principles. It described a theoretical organism of planetary scale, a creature that hibernates for cosmic eons, its slow metabolic processes perfectly mimicking geological activity. Its breath, the file stated, would be indistinguishable from a geothermal vent. Its circulatory system, a network of mineral-rich, superheated fluid. The screen displayed ancient-looking diagrams of a colossal, sleeping creature wrapped around a planet's core, and Kaelen felt a terror born not of fear, but of understanding. He stumbled to the main observatory, his legs unsteady. He stared out the thick viewport at the seabed below, a landscape he had observed with detached familiarity for years. But he no longer saw a geological feature. He saw skin. He saw the slumbering flank of a god. The truth crashed down on him with the weight of the ocean above. The geothermal vent was not a power source. It was a lung. Ventus-IX was not a research station. It was a parasite. And he, Kaelen, was its solitary keeper. With the weight of his discovery pressing down harder than the ocean above, Kaelen sat before the comms panel. His hands hovered over the interface, sweat beading on his brow. Thorne's demand for more power was no longer a simple corporate directive. It was a command to injure a living god. He began to type, deleting and rephrasing each sentence. He couldn't tell the truth, but he couldn't obey. He settled on a dangerous fabrication, weaving a lie from the language of his former life. Geothermal instability. He wrote, significant microfractures detected in the primary vent conduit. Increasing output is inadvisable. Recommend immediate diagnostic. It was a plausible fiction, a shield of technical jargon against an unthinkable reality. The moment he sent the message, the station answered. It began not as a violent earthquake, but as a low, pervasive vibration that resonated deep in his bones. It was a slow, rhythmic shudder, a deep-seated tremor that felt less geological and more biological. A single data tablet skittered off a console and clattered to the floor. Then, the emergency lights flickered as red proximity alerts began to shriek through the halls. The station's structural integrity alarms blared in a deafening chorus. Kaelen gripped his console, his knuckles white. This was no quake. This was the slow, titanic contraction of a muscle. The involuntary shift of a colossal body turning in its eons-long slumber. The sleeper was stirring. Thorne's reply was almost instantaneous, cutting through the alarms with chilling speed. His voice was no longer just impersonal. It was laced with a condescending threat. Unacceptable, Kaelen. Your sensor logs show no such instability prior to my request. We are not fools. On Kaelen's main screen, a new schematic appeared, a monstrous, multi-ton apparatus with a formidable laser tip. Your instability is a matter of efficiency, nothing more. A corporate geoengineering team aboard the vessel Tom Arbiter's Time is being dispatched to your location. Their deep core drill will rectify the issue and ensure output targets are met. The schematic rotated, showing the drill's target point, the very heart of the glowing, living vent. The message was clear. Compliance was no longer optional. Kaelen stood in the main observatory, the station's alarms now a dull, distant thrum. He stared down at the faintly glowing seabed, no longer seeing a power source, but the fragile skin of a living, breathing world eater. The drill wouldn't just rectify an issue. It would be a spear thrust into a dreaming mind. He knew with absolute certainty that a forced awakening would not just destroy the station, but shatter the very crust of the planet. In that moment, his purpose crystallized. He was no longer the caretaker of Ventus-IX. He was the guardian of the progenitor. He placed a hand on the cold, thick viewport, a silent vow to the immense, silent darkness below. He would not let them harm it. Exhausted, Kaelen retreated to his small quarters, the station still groaning around him. As he lay in the darkness trying to process the impossible weight of his new reality, a new sensation began. It was not a sound that reached his ears, but a low, resonant hum that bloomed directly within his mind. It was a chord of immense, ancient power. For a fleeting second, the sterile gray walls of his room vanished, replaced by a fragmented, impossible vision of swirling nebulae and rivers of stars flowing like blood. It was a thought, but it was not his own. It was an echo from the god below, a single, dreaming note in the silent abyss. That night, Kaelen did not dream of the station, but of the god. He was disembodied, a point of awareness drifting through vast, internal cathedrals of glowing crystal. He floated down arteries of liquid light, the rhythmic pulse of the progenitor's life resonating not in his ears, but in his very essence. It was here, in the slow, ancient consciousness of the being, that he felt its thoughts. They were not words, but immense glacial concepts, the patient weight of eons spent in silent slumber, the slow turning of galaxies, and an emotion that dwarfed all others, a profound and cosmic loneliness. He was a mote of dust in the mind of a universe, and for the first time he felt an impossible empathy. He awoke with a gasp, the dream still clinging to him like the abyssal cold. The biorhythmic signals on his console were no longer a mystery. They were a language, a heartbeat. Driven by a new, desperate hope, Kaelen began to work. If the station was a parasite, perhaps it could also be a nerve ending. He bypassed safety protocols, carefully modulating the station's energy draw, attempting to shape the power output into a waveform that mirrored the slow, rhythmic pulse of the progenitor's mind. It was a shot in the dark, a whisper sent into the heart of a mountain, an attempt to communicate. The response was immediate. A low, powerful tremor, deeper than the one before, shuddered through Ventus-IX. It was not a mindless spasm. It felt inquisitive. With trembling hands, Kaelen sent the Manta drone back into the vent. The feed was stable as the drone descended into the glowing abyss, its lights cutting through the superheated water. It passed the familiar crystalline structures, then pushed deeper into a vast, dark cavern. Kaelen watched, holding his breath, as the drone's light swept across a vast, curved surface of mottled organic tissue. Then, the surface moved. A colossal, miles-wide eyelid began to twitch open, revealing a sliver of a luminous, star-filled iris. The eye of the progenitor was looking back at him. The drone's feed crackled and died as the lid, slowly, deliberately, closed once more. Before Kaelen could process the sheer, mind-breaking terror of what he had witnessed, a sharp, clinical alarm pierced the silence of the control room. Proximity alert. Long-range contact. He stumbled to the tactical display. A single red icon was moving steadily toward the station's position. Designation: Corporate Vessel, Arbiter. They were coming. The countdown to confrontation had begun. Knowing he could never fight them, Kaelen made a new decision. He would not be a caretaker or a communicator. He would be a saboteur. In the station's engineering deck, surrounded by the hum of machinery, he began his desperate work. Logic bombs were planted in the docking clamp controls. Physical conduits for the deep-core drill were rerouted to dead ends. His face, illuminated by the harsh light of a plasma torch, was a mask of grim rebellion. Kaelen stood in the main observatory as the last vestiges of twilight from the ice-covered surface vanished. A colossal shadow descended through the abyssal dark, a void within the void that blotted out the faint ambient light. The industrial submarine, the Arbiter, arrived not with a sound, but with an oppressive presence that dwarfed Ventus-IX. Its powerful searchlights ignited, sweeping across the station in cold, interrogating beams, turning Kaelen's sanctuary into a specimen under a microscope. Back in the control room, the comms panel activated without his command. A holographic effigy of Director Thorne materialized, his features sharp and unforgiving. Kaelen, Thorne's voice was live now, stripped of delay and filled with cold steel. Your games are over. We are aware of your system tampering. Your fabricated stability reports have been noted. Thorne leaned closer, his digital eyes seeming to pierce through the screen. You will stand down and grant my engineering team full access. Cooperate, or we will take control by force. This is your final warning. Kaelen's jaw tightened, his silent defiance meeting the director's ultimatum. Before Kaelen could even formulate a response, his console flashed red. His hands flew across the interface, but every command was rejected. A calm, automated voice filled the room, a chilling counterpoint to Kaelen's rising panic. External command override initiated. Control transferred to Vessel Arbiter. Screens across the room cascaded with a single, brutal message. Access denied. Against his will, the station's systems began to thrum with new life, its machinery reconfiguring to welcome the very weapon he had tried to stop. He was a prisoner in his own command center. Through the forward viewports, Kaelen watched in horror as the Arbiter's belly opened. From it descended a weapon of terrifying scale, a multi-ton deep-core drill, its adamantium teeth designed to shatter geology. It was lowered with an inexorable, mechanical grace, positioning itself directly over the station's central conduit, the very artery leading to the sleeping entity below. The air in the control room grew heavy as the drill's formidable laser tip began to hum, glowing with a malevolent white-hot energy. The countdown to catastrophe had begun. Locked out and powerless, Kaelen sprinted back to the observatory. It was his only remaining option, a desperate act of faith in a connection he barely understood. He pressed his hands and forehead against the cold, thick viewport, staring down into the glowing abyss. Closing his eyes, he ignored the station's automated preparations and focused all his will, all his fear, and all his desperate desire to protect. He sent a raw, silent scream of pure thought into the deep, a psionic plea of warning, of apology, of agony, directed at the heart of the sleeping god below. His psionic plea was answered not with a thought, but with a deluge. Kaelen's consciousness was torn from the station and plunged into the mind of the world. It was a vision of impossible scale, a coherent and powerful transmission that dwarfed his own existence. He witnessed the progenitor's true purpose. It was a galactic seed, a dormant terraformer slumbering for eons. Its slow, rhythmic breath didn't just generate heat. It meticulously conditioned the planet, preparing it for life over millennia. The vision then showed him the consequence of the drill, of a premature awakening. It would not be a simple rousing. It would be a convulsion that would shatter the planet's crust, a cataclysmic end to its silent, patient work. The truth was both revelatory and utterly terrifying. The vision released him just as the physical reaction began. Outside the viewport, the abyssal plane started to glow, shifting from a soft bioluminescence to an intense, angry red. The station's external sensors shrieked as the water temperature skyrocketed past all safety thresholds, the pressure hull groaning in protest. From the central vent, the gentle thermal current erupted into a maelstrom. Powerful, chaotic tendrils of pure energy lashed out, boiling the water around them and slamming against the station with concussive force. The planet was developing a fever, and Ventus-IX was at its epicenter. The comms channel crackled to life, Thorne's voice cutting through the chaos. The condescending calm was gone, replaced by a raw, strained panic. "Caretaker, what have you done? Report!" On Kaelen's console, the icon for the asterisk arbiter flashed with cascading damage warnings. "We're reading energy signatures beyond anything. It's tearing us apart. Reverse it!" Thorne's corporate arrogance had finally met a reality it could not bully into submission. He was demanding answers from the man he had dismissed, completely out of his depth, in the face of a god's pained reflex. Kaelen ignored the plea. He understood now. The progenitor wasn't attacking. It was reacting blindly, a wounded leviathan thrashing in its sleep. Its uncontrolled agony would destroy the asterisk arbiter dully doldenant, the station, and eventually, the entire world. There was only one option left. He couldn't soothe it, but he might be able to shock it back into deep hibernation. The station's reactor core, a miniature star of contained fusion, was his only weapon and his only tool. He had to overload it, creating an energy feedback loop powerful enough to act as a planetary defibrillator. He raced to the station's engineering deck, to the reactor control panel that was still under his local authority. He ignored the flashing warnings and the groaning of tortured metal, his actions precise and deliberate. From a locked panel, he produced a single brass key, the failsafe for a manual override. He slammed it into the port and twisted. Immediately, the room was filled with the deafening sound of a new alarm, a final blaring siren that began a 60-second countdown to a full core overload. The act was irreversible. As the final countdown echoed through the groaning reactor room, Kaelen worked with a frantic, focused intensity. His hands flew across the console, bypassing safety interlocks and opening primary power relays. With each command, he rerouted the entire station's energy potential, channeling decades of accumulated power away from life support and into the central geothermal conduit. The thick, armored power lines lining the walls began to glow with a fierce internal heat, turning Ventus-IX from a research station into a massive planet-sized defibrillator aimed directly at the heart of the sleeping progenitor. The point of no return had been passed. A final, broken message burst from the comms panel, the voice of Director Thorne stripped of all authority, replaced by raw, pathetic fear. "Kaelen, stop! For God's sake, stop the overload. We'll give you anything, a pardon, a promotion." The comm screen showed the Arbiter's icon flashing with critical damage warnings, its hull buckling under the progenitor's fury. Kaelen ignored the plea, his eyes fixed on the final seconds of the countdown. The time for bargains was over. The universe was holding its breath. With the overload imminent, Kaelen broke into a desperate sprint. The corridors of Ventus-IX had become a death trap, the entire structure convulsing in its final moments. Emergency strobes cast his flight in jarring flashes of red light, as overhead panels rained down sparks and entire sections of the hallway buckled inward. A steam pipe ruptured ahead, forcing him to vault over a collapsed gantry, the superheated vapor scalding the air around him. The station screamed its own death rattle, a symphony of tearing metal and blaring alarms, as Kaelen raced against the clock towards the single escape pod. He threw himself into the escape pod bay just as the main door buckled, sealing him inside. Kaelen barely had time to strap himself into the crash harness before slamming the launch sequence button. The countdown hit 0. With a percussive clang of explosive bolts and the violent hiss of compressed gas, the pod was ejected from its housing, thrown clear of the dying station like a bullet fired from a gun. Through the small viewport, he caught one last glimpse of the station's interior before the hatch sealed him in darkness. From the relative safety of his pod, Kaelen watched the unmaking of his world. Ventus-IX, the only home he had known, glowed white-hot for a single, eternal second. Then, it erupted not in an explosion, but a silent, brilliant implosion of pure energy. A perfect sphere of white light vaporized the station, collapsing in on itself before unleashing a massive, directed wave of power down the geothermal conduit. The shock wave, a visible distortion in the water, slammed into Kaelen's pod, but his eyes were fixed on the torrent of energy flowing into the abyss, a final, desperate offering to the god below. The shock wave hit the escape pod like a titan's hammer. Metal screamed as the small vessel was thrown end over end through the crushing darkness. Alarms blared in a cacophony of electronic panic, red lights strobing across Kaelen's face as his head was slammed against the viewport. Systems failed in a cascade of sparks and dying readouts. Then, as the pod continued its violent tumble into the abyss, the emergency lights flickered once and died, plunging him into absolute blackness as consciousness fled. Kaelen awoke not to alarms, but to a profound and unnerving silence. The only light came from the faint green glow of the emergency power systems, casting long shadows within the cramped cockpit. His head throbbed, but he pushed the pain aside, pulling himself toward the viewport. He looked out into the deep, expecting to see the raging tempest of energy he had unleashed. Instead, he saw peace. The chaotic storms were gone. The furious, violent light had subsided. In its place, the entire abyssal plain below him glowed with a soft, steady, rhythmic pulse. It was the slow, deep, and untroubled breath of a sleeping god. His gamble had paid off. As the pod drifted on the silent currents, a ghost emerged from the gloom. It was the wreckage of the Arbiter, its formidable hull torn open like paper. Great sections of twisted metal and shattered conduits floated in a slow, macabre ballet. The powerful corporate vessel that had descended with such arrogance was now a tomb, silenced by the brief, pained stirring of a power it could never comprehend. Kaelen watched the debris field pass by, finding no signs of life, no signals, nothing but the cold, quiet testament to Thorne's fatal miscalculation. Just as a profound sense of isolation began to settle upon him, Kaelen felt a final, gentle touch upon his mind. It was not a vision of stars or a complex thought, but something far more pure and overwhelming. It was a wave of feeling and emotion so vast and ancient, it had no need for words or images. It filled every part of his being, a warmth that pushed back the deep-sea cold, a resonant hum that vibrated in his very soul. The feeling was singular and unmistakable. gratitude. And then, as gently as it arrived, it was gone. The connection faded, and the silence that returned was deeper than before. Kaelen was no longer a participant in a cosmic event. He was merely a survivor. The warmth of the progenitor's gratitude receded, replaced by the cold, hard logic of his situation. He ran a diagnostic on the pod's surviving systems. The results were grim. Life support was stable on emergency power, but would last only weeks. The main drive was destroyed. Long-range communications were gone. No one in the universe knew what had happened here. No one knew he was alive. No one was coming for him. He was, once again, utterly alone. Drifting in the crushing blackness, Kaelen did not despair. The instinct for survival, the desperate clawing for the surface, was gone, replaced by a profound and steady calm. He looked at the pod's status displays, not as a prisoner calculating his remaining hours, but as a technician assessing his tools. With methodical precision, he began rerouting non-essential systems, conserving energy not for a rescue that would never come, but for a vigil that had just begun. He was no longer a survivor. He was a guardian, the sole witness to the greatest secret in human history. He activated the pod's recording function, his voice steady in the silent cabin. Log entry: Kaelen, sole survivor of Ventus-IX. The geothermal vent is not a geological feature. It is a life form, a progenitor-class entity of planetary scale, and it is sleeping beneath us. Do not drill. Do not disturb it. To wake it is to unmake this world. He encrypted the file, a lifetime of discovery compressed into a few solemn words, and set the comms system to broadcast the signal on a low-power, wideband frequency. A message in a bottle cast into the cosmic ocean for a future that might one day be wise enough to listen. The corporation, in time, would issue its report. The loss of Ventus-IX and the deep-range vessel Arbiter would be attributed to an unforeseen and catastrophic geothermal event, a tragic accident. Kaelen's name would be etched onto a memorial wall, a footnote in a disaster filed away for insurance purposes. His act of sacrifice, the salvation of a world, would be buried under layers of corporate redaction and plausible deniability, his heroism forever unknown to the species he had protected. Kaelen observed the steady, rhythmic pulse of energy from the seabed below. With careful modifications, he deployed a microfilament collector, tapping a minuscule, harmless fraction of the thermal current to power the pod's life support. The station had been a parasite, a needle draining the lifeblood of a god. He would be different. He was no longer taking but sharing. In the deepest, darkest corner of the universe, a new and silent symbiosis had been born between a single man and a slumbering world-shaper. From his viewport, Kaelen looked down upon the abyssal plain, which glowed with the gentle, rhythmic light of a slow and steady heartbeat. The crushing solitude he had once felt was gone, replaced by a sense of connection so profound it defied language. He was a single neuron in a mind the size of a planet, a silent watcher in a cathedral of impossible scale. He was alone, but he was not lonely. He was the caretaker, the last line of defense for the sleeping god below. His watch had begun.